Hey RATBAGGERS, it's Jade. Core Keeper 1.0 is pretty much nearly here and obviously launching on console. It's about time I give you some top tips. These are the things I wish I knew before playing, including taking a look at the differences between some of the classes, how important pets are going to be, top tips on mining, gathering resources and fighting enemies, as well as finding the bosses you need to progress. Towards the end of this guide, it is going to be a mini blitz through the first 4 bosses, and I will give you a big enough warning so that you can avoid spoilers on 3 of them, but there's so many bosses in the game, I think it's worth including in a video like this. So hopefully you find it useful. If you do, make sure you subscribe, go and check out the rest of my older Core Keeper guides, many still good, but I'm making brand new fresh ones as well. Let's go, one of my favourite games going, Wish I Knew Earlier. Everything you do in Core Keeper, you gain experience in that skill, whether it's cooking, exploring, melee damage, range damage, as well as the 2 new classes that are added as 1.0, Warlock and Mage. These skill levels go up to level 100 and you get a bunch of perks at various different points as you level up. So some skills you'll level up really quickly because you'll be doing it constantly. Other skills that you might want to invest in early are definitely something you need to concentrate on. At the start of the game, you're asked to choose a class, or really background, and this is really minor. Don't get too caught up about being stuck in something. You can always go and change your weapons, your playstyles. It only just gives you a tiny little boost. More important is really the actual items that you get with them. You will pretty much max out your mining as well as your exploration skills very early on compared to some of the others, and unless you're an absolute fishing fiend, that's one of the ones that will probably take a while. So basically go with what playstyle you think would be more interesting. What I will say is the Warlock class, it took me a while before I found another tome, so that's the item you use to summon minions to fight for you. In fact, it took about 4 to 6 hours before another one dropped. And since it's new, I would recommend trying that or the Mage class. But you will get an absolute ton of the actual staves as you progress. But these have no effect on the end game, so you can go for cooking and you'll get a pot and that will give you better buffs from food that you cook earlier, or the Explorer one does give you the lantern, which makes things a bit easier to see in the dark, but you'll quickly discover the foods that allow that anyway. Whatever the skill, just don't worry too much. Something that will matter is how you set up your world. There are 2 game modes at the moment, standard and hard. Hard will increase the amount of loot you get, but it does make enemies more tanky and they'll hit harder. It looks like that's going to be having a revamp in the future. So I would actually wait until that happens and then you might decide to jump into it once the devs add it in a future update. What really matters is the brand new world generation. These are new settings being added for 1.0 and they can absolutely make your game easier or tougher. Generally it's all pretty self-explanatory. You can increase the amount of ores that appear. Definitely recommend putting that on high if you're fairly new or playing solo. Other settings I wouldn't necessarily put on low, things like tunnels or caverns, as they're pretty crucial to finding more ores as well as enemies. Biome chaos is a weird one. If you put it to high or extreme, it means that the biomes overlap each other quite a bit, and it does actually make getting around sometimes tougher because you'll find various little caverns and places where there's only like one strip of land and you might have to do a lot of bridge building. And it does make the game harder because them enemies that are normally locked off a bit behind certain biomes, they'll be mingling more and effectively you'll be running into tougher enemies quicker. So I would leave that as normal. If you like a bit more light, absolutely put ceiling holes to high. That just allows a bit more natural light in the game. If you're really used to these type of games, absolutely put some of them settings on low if you really want a more tougher experience. Otherwise, like I said, leave most of them on normal other than maybe ore density and the ceiling lights. So you win your core and just like all crafting games, pick up any resources you can find like wood straight away and make good use of crafting everything you can. These are the statues that you need to power up eventually by basically putting in the drops that come from the bosses. Once you've done that, you'll power up the core and it opens up a big world barrier that opens up the rest of the game to go and explore even more biomes and tougher enemies. Something I really wish I'd done much sooner is go straight into the gamepad settings and change and mix up some of the controls. Hopefully on the same on controls on console as it is on PC at the moment with control pads. If you use the joystick and the D-pad, they act as the same thing. You can move your character with both. But by swapping the D-pad for more vital stuff, you'll make life a lot easier. You can have 3 different classes of equipment anywhere you're going just simply by ticking on the 1, 2 or 3 on the side of your character, but you can absolutely utilize them. And on keyboard there's already keys for it, on controller you may have to map them, so use the D-pads for stuff like that. I use the other spare D-pad to go ahead and remove the UI just as it makes things a bit nicer sometimes. But honestly, it's up to you. Take a good look through some of the stuff that you might have played with other games and just remap some of them D-pad controls. Just make sure you press replace rather than the same, as obviously you don't want to be moving around and then always continuously swapping out your gear. Don't panic about building a base immediately. There are chances sometimes you get a rush of certain mobs like spiky slimes and maybe some cavelins as you progress, and they can come pretty much homing in on you wherever you are. But in general, there's no real big need to worry about base defences just yet. Just simply go around gathering enough resources, put a chest down and think a bit more about what you want your core to look like, as there's some great 3D art, and even if you're not that minded, it's still worth just taking your time before you start base building proper. But as said, it's a rare event when the enemies come for you. In terms of ore, the most useful is absolutely going to be copper and tin. Tin tends to spawn a little bit more rarer in the dirt biome. You'll have to head into the clay biomes to find big deposits of it. Ancient gemstones, depending on your setting, might also be a bit rarer, and you do need a lot of them to summon pretty much boss items and craft more high-end gear. But I would say focus on always trying to get as much copper and tin in the early stages. And never pass up the opportunity to harvest any of the vegetables and fruits that you find. What you're really looking for is hopefully seed drops. As you start to learn the game, you'll realise that you don't get a 1-for-1 ratio when you harvest a crop, i.e. it won't guarantee you a seed. It's only a chance of getting one. So if you want to build big farms and have enough resources to make all the foods and the potions you need, you definitely need lots of seeds. So yeah, don't pass up the opportunity. Even if you've got like 20 or something, always go and harvest it in the early days so you can get your seeds. And absolutely try to avoid eating raw foods. They will generally replenish your food, but some can actually be poisonous and take away health until they're actually cooked. So get that cook pot up and running as soon as you can, as you pretty much double the bonuses as well as unlock new ones whenever you've got cooked food. My best advice is to always go ahead and cook 2 of the same item to give you the base bonuses of what it gives you. This will then be marked down in your actual cookbook, and if you put a chest next to it, it will take the inventory out there so you don't have to always mess around carrying stuff with you. That's a tip for everything. If you've got boxes or chests filled with your resources next to that crafting bench, it will automatically craft from the bench. But once you've got one of these foods, then stop making the same stuff and combine your foods instead, as you get more bonuses. There's no actual benefits or buffs from just cooking the same stuff. Like 2 mushrooms here, you're better off combining that mushroom with whatever other plant you've managed to find, just like I have with the peppers as well. There's over 100 different food recipes when you take into account all the fish that you can cook. So yeah, like I said, cooking skill is one that you won't necessarily need to worry about. And don't hoard stuff too much. Go ahead and cook and craft, especially in the early days, as you want to get your crafting skill up, as it gives you bonuses like getting extra items when you craft. That's particularly good for going ahead and crafting maybe decorative pieces or floor pieces, or maybe even stone walls. If you've done a ton of digging, go ahead and craft a couple hundred all the time, so that way your crafting skill is being increased rapidly. Check your talent skills regularly. It'll always pop up in the bottom left whenever you've got a new point to go ahead and use. Usually the font is in yellow, as you never know when you're about to hit a perk that's going to give you a lot more buffs, so make sure you're always checking. When it comes to the perks, they're pretty set, but there are some as you go through the tree that you'll only be able to unlock depending on what route you've taken, but you can always reset for credits later. So again, don't panic too much, just put your points into them as quickly as you can, and when it comes to making a choice between your 2 perks, well, you'll by then get a gauge of how well or what you've been doing most of. Quick few tips now. As you explore, you'll come across these musical little puzzles. You have to play a musical instrument with the right notes, and you'll get access to a little bit of loot. They're not always that worth it. Inside, I generally found just resources I probably had enough of already. But it's cheap enough to make an instrument, carry it around with you, and as you progress through some of the other biomes, it might become more worth it. The big deposits that you come across, you will need drills, and they're well worth doing. You won't be able to unlock full automation until you get hold of some scarlet bars a bit later. So for now, any ore that you do drill up will just simply go behind the drill, but they'll be safe there. No one's going to run around and take them, and they don't despawn. You can set up 8 drills around these deposits, and invariably you'll start getting lots of ore dropping from them all. When it first launched, there was a bit of conjecture about exactly how effective too many drills could be, as the click rates ended up being nerfed or changed, but I do think it's still the same now. The 8 drills with the right kind of smelting and eventually robotic arms that can transfer the ore into a smelter will mean that you can come back here over time and have it already put into actual ingots. You don't really need the base ore for anything to craft, it's always better to turn it into ingots straight away. But until you get them arms with the red scarlet or the scarlet bars, yeah, just go ahead and place as many drills as you can make out of tin, and that's the best approach. Now it is advisable that you kind of stick to making, I would say, mineshaft or strip mining, basically going in one direction if you can. Totally use caverns and caves, as that will get you exploring the core more and you've got more chances of finding loot in chests as well as drops from enemies. But if you generally stick to one direction over another for a good while, that will hold you in good stead if it's more or less a straight line for eventually when it comes to finding a boss. You'll basically be given ways to go ahead and find the location of the 3 main bosses you'll be taking on. And so in the future it's going to pay to have the straightest line possible to it, so you can put even a railway track, as you'll be fighting the bosses over and over again if you want the chances of getting some of the best loot. The bosses have unique drops that have a small chance of dropping, so you really are encouraged to take them on over and over again. You do unlock the fast travel system later, you can put your own teleportals around and you will find brand new waypoints they've added as part 1.0. But that won't be for a while. Apart from the recall stones that give you a one-way trip back home, it's definitely worth investing once you unlock it, railways. It's something new to me that previously I never bothered with, as I always felt like I had lots of buffs and items that I'd managed to pick up giving me speed boosts. But when you're in a railway car, it doesn't eat up any of your food. Every 20 squares or so, that's how your food goes down. But when you're in a railway car, it doesn't. So yeah, bear that in mind. Follow caverns absolutely. Like I said, it will take you to more ores normally that you can see in the walls easier. But as soon as you're able to craft items that show where the bosses are, do go ahead and make sure you build a rail network as fast and clean to it as possible. Don't be scared to kill enemies. It can be some of your greatest and quickest ways to get armor. Even in the early days, you can get a ton of drops, particularly drops like the slime protection, i.e. basically waterproof duds. These will help you get over the slime so it doesn't slow you. Not necessarily giving you great buffs for combat, but it's the only way that you'll find some of this gear. And maybe because I have been experimenting more with the warlock and mage classes, I've yet to actually craft any proper armor. You'll find plenty of armor at the actual anvils once you start placing down the various different ones. If you're fully focused on being a melee class or a ranger class, then it's probably worth investing in some of the armors that are going to give you either more critical or melee hits. See them little X's in the ground? Make sure you dig them up with your spade. They'll often produce some of the junk that you can go and sell to traders for credits later. You can get other loot from them as well as even seeds, so it's definitely always worth digging up the X's in the early days. As a rule of thumb, in the dirt you will find lots of slime enemies. As you start exploring more of the cave, you will come across more grubs, and as you go through the Forbidden Ruins, you'll come across more cavelins. But remember, if you set your biome generation to be either high or extreme, you may encounter more of these biomes within each other, meaning you've got tougher enemies to deal with. By now you should have worked out the regular slimes will leave you alone, it's only the spiky ones that will do damage, but everything else pretty much does want to kill you. Slimes are a good way to increase your melee or range damage as well, so make sure you kill plenty of them. And just a quick tip on weapons, I found that the kind of copper gear is probably not worth crafting and skipping over as soon as you get enough tin. And yeah, again another obvious one, but craft everything. Like as soon as you're able to, put a smelter down and start cooking your ores that you've already discovered. Set up 2 or 3 of the ore stations. You don't need to panic about waste because you can always go and sell some of them to traders, and at least craft 1 of everything as soon as you're able to pretty much unlock something new in your crafting bench or even the anvil. That way you get to test around with some of the armors and weapons and see if they're for you. Things also like being able to incubate the eggs. The eggs take a long time, and this is how you get pets. You can get them from random drops from enemies or in chests, and the eggs can give you a big bonus. It's definitely recommended as soon as you see one to get one of the incubators and get your pet as quick as possible. There's at least 8 pets that you'll come across in the early days, and it looks like there's another 2 being added as part of the late game. Pets are vital in helping you. They'll either give you direct buffs or they can directly attack enemies around you and give you a big warning sometimes that something's coming. And just because you get one type of egg and you don't see the point in incubating the rest because it's the same, don't, as they all have unique perk drops. Basically, just like you've got skills and perks, your pets do too. You don't get as much choice in them, but some of the pets do come with more rare or unique traits. So it's always worth incubating them and seeing if they've got some of the traits that more fit your playstyle. You might come across a pet that's going to give you a speed boost, and then another same exact pet that will give you 2 speed boosts if you choose the right perks as you level up. You will come across plenty of candies, and you get super candies that give lots of experience to your pets too. So don't get gear fear in saving them up waiting for the perfect pet roll. Go ahead and use them liberally. I promise you will find plenty as you progress. And a bit like the mob farming, you can come across friendly creatures that you can bring back with you, and basically they will start dropping items once you feed them. So you can set up feeder boxes, put any of your foods inside and the ones that you got the most surplus of, and then yeah, eventually they'll start dropping things like wool and milk. There's a whole bunch of different cattle that you can find in different biomes, so it's well worth making sure that when you spot some, you mark it down, come back with a leash and some of the cages and bring them home. You'll notice there's not a lot you can actually craft with the drops they give you in the early stages, but trust me, by the time you get to the later part of the game, so much of the stuff they give you is really worth it. If you've got no water near you, bring the water to you. Use your shovel and dig a trench so that you've got plenty of water to make crop growing easier. The better the tool, the wider effect that you can do stuff. So the watering can will have a bigger area it waters. Likewise, the hose, they'll be able to go ahead and harvest your crops or make the ground ready to sow much bigger. I for sure wish I knew that I would need bigger spaces or ways to grow wood. Wood is everywhere, but you will need absolute thousands of it as you play Core Keeper. And there are ways that you can generate auto wood farms, which I'll show in a while. But in the early stages, you definitely want to be planting some of the wood seeds you come across. Just find a cavern that hasn't got loads of slime in it, or pretty much anywhere with a relatively big space, and just put one down, water it. Just don't plant it anywhere near your regular crops, or anywhere close enough to your base where it might get in the way of you base building later. You'll be able to set up automated farms using drills to chop the wood eventually, but yeah, it's definitely worth making sure you've got plenty of wood in the early days. Another most important resource is probably grub carrot. That's basically fibre. It's the one crop I found that I was short of time and time again, pretty much in the early days. And the more that you get your crops up and running and growing, the more chance you'll get them points, and you've got more chance of getting the seeds back, which is probably the best perk that you get as you level up basically farming. As well as eventually getting superfoods that give even more better bonuses. It takes more resources, but absolutely make sure you reinforce your gear, your armor and your weapons, as it can make a big difference in staying alive longer or having more durability so you can spend longer exploring. You'll basically unlock the salvage bench, and here you can go ahead and get rid of any spare armors and weapons, and do that frequently. As you can see, you get some decent resources from them, included the much needed scrap parts to repair your armor. Reinforcing it usually costs though more resources, things like metal ingots or maybe fibre, but it's definitely worth investing as it will make that stuff last longer and make you more powerful. So always, if you can, go ahead and reinforce everything. Now, because the YouTube algorithm doesn't really care about dates or changes to updates, you will see a lot of videos talking about how important it is to start mob farming. Basically, you can set up traps and ways that mobs will spawn and effectively get the loot that they drop. And again, sometimes they can drop really rare good stuff. But there were a good few changes that reduce the effectiveness of this, and a lot of the videos rely on you basically having tons of resources that you just won't have yet. But it's something to bear in mind. So once you start getting the ability, as well as a lot of either ingots to craft metal spikes, do think about starting mob farms. I did a couple guides, but probably not as good as others, and I really didn't get into it as much as I wanted, but I'm definitely going to change that now 1.0 is here. Dakon's Madhouse is probably one of the best creators in Core Keeper in terms of really dedicated content, so make sure you check him out. I'm sure you've probably come across him if you've already been looking up Core Keeper stuff. Mob farming is really useful eventually, but don't worry about trying to get them set up too much until you've gone and explored and taken on the first 2 or 3 bosses. As said earlier, if you choose the fishing skill, you do get a good, decent fishing rod, but it won't be long before you can get your own. And although I don't like fishing, there's definitely big benefits. The food that it gives you is often given some of the better buffs, and they have now made the minigame a lot easier if you choose it to be. You can turn it back to the old way in the game settings, or at the very least that's been added in the very near future. Each biome will have more dedicated fish that you can only catch there, but do pay attention also that you can bring some of that water back to you and set up special lakes. So even though it pains me to say, don't ignore fishing. It's definitely a really good source of food and chances of getting other stuff. Shout out to the wiki for this one, but the core is pretty much split like this. You'll have lots of dirt all around and some smaller little sites for you to explore, then it kind of branches off. Of course, remembering it's procedure generated, so you might have the clay caves actually to the south, the forgotten ruins to the north, or to the east, to the west. You get the idea. If you've got biomes set on extreme, these can really overlap a lot, and you'll have much bigger or smaller pockets of clay caves, forgotten ruins, kind of intermingling. Then intersecting in the middle of the clay caves and forgotten ruins, you will have Ghorm's Circle, a giant worm boss that you'll have to defeat eventually. And he pretty much runs a whole ring. This can be really good for finding lots of resources quickly and mapping out exactly where there might be more clay caves and forgotten ruins in what direction, especially if you have set your biome generation to extreme. The larger circle around the clay caves and the forgotten ruins, that's the world border that you won't be able to unlock or open or progress past until you defeated Malugaz and the other bosses. You know you've done it because you basically power up the core. That's how you unlock Asios Wilderness, the Sunken Sea and the Desert of Beginnings, as well as more sub-biomes. And even if you've done that, you might not even be able to dig through certain resources until you get your mining skill up higher. So do make sure you're swapping out your actual loadouts regularly if you've built one that's got more mining damage so you can explore further. Now you can come across some of the bosses completely random, but there is certain things you can use to summon or find where they are after you've defeated the first one. If you defeat Glurch, it unlocks items that will find the other bosses easy. It will always be around 65 squares from the core and basically follow anywhere that you see lots of slime. Glurch is all about speed and being able to get out of the way, especially when walking over slime. So if you do find that the waterproof drops from killing the slimes, absolutely recommend wearing them. Otherwise you could go around and try using a better hoe to remove some of the slime, but that's usually best served for when you're going to be summoning Glurch again. Instead, make sure you've got enough room to run around and so that you can avoid most of these jumps, and use something like the dash you get from the Swift Feather if you picked it up so that you can just move out of the way quickly, or craft the foods that will give you the speed boost. That's usually peppers. Bosses do regain their health if you pretty much go out of the render, i.e. just off screen. You can't really shoot them or cheese them from just off screen. And do put a marker down every boss location that you found if you're not going to be building railways to them, just in case you do want to come fight them again in future. You need to remember where they are. You should be able to set markers down on your map. This little bearded guy, don't panic, he's going to be your first trader and you'll be taking him home. So just loot everything inside, particularly the slime jar. As long as you place that in a small room with a torch and a bed, then you'll get the NPC, eventually trader, spawning in that room. Just go off screen and usually it will spawn in. The rooms have to be full-fledged rooms with proper walls. Don't make the room any bigger than 8 by 8 squares. And give a bit of room, don't put furniture absolutely everywhere. You need at least 1 square free. You can then put Glurch's eye inside the actual core and it will unlock the 2 summoning stones to find the next 2 bosses, as well as a slime sword. That's pretty much how it works for all the traders. As you'll progress, more traders will be unlocked by defeating certain bosses, although you can come across them in the wild unless anything's changed. But you'll still need the summoning item to go ahead and put it in a room. Once you've managed to go ahead and craft the summoning items, I would go for Ghorm first. Although he's relatively easy to spot as he does go around in a big circle, it's actually better if you do keep tabs on him, as it will show him moving around the map just so you know to get out of the way, just in case you're mining close by. Again, this is another reason why you kind of want to pick one direction and just go for it with a straight line to make it nice easy access to get at least to that circle. And just to show a bit of a jump in between me facing off against different bosses, I did spend some time decorating and expanding. These are all decorative tiles that you can place and colour in later with paintbrushes. But as said, take your time before you start going base building, as you do unlock a bunch of different resources that will save you a lot of maybe breaking down stuff and putting it back up again later. although at least you do get all your resources back if you do so. Here's a little sneak peek of my old world and just see the various differences in terms of exploring the map and my base eventually, what I ended up with, trying to do some weird castle pixel art. This actually took me about 2 weeks of playing when I was sick one Christmas to really get this castle looking exactly how I wanted it, with all the displays and different areas of crafting. Anywho, back to boss hunting, it's time to take on Ghorm. And it's at this stage, if you really don't want spoilers about bosses, although none of them are end game, but some people might want the experience for themselves, I would say thank you for watching, take care, check out the rest of my guides when you want, and you'll probably see more individual ones if you're having trouble with any of the next ones I'm showing you. But otherwise, yeah, I'm going to show the next 3 bosses. Just remember, there's so many more bosses and variants, this feels like it really is still part of a starter guide. So pick and choose somewhere, put a bed down close by, out of Ghorm's range of his circle, and then get to work removing any slime using a hoe. Not absolutely necessary, but we're going to be putting a bunch of traps down. These can be really effective in giving you a good head start against them. Now you don't need to put traps down, especially if you've got speedy items. You can pretty much chase him firing at him with range, and effectively once you've got him to a certain point he'll stop going around in a circle and basically try just killing you. But this is a good method of getting his health down relatively quick and cheap. So craft a bunch of the traps. Again, you don't need to put tons down, it'll just do enough of a job hopefully to trigger him to stay and pretty much put. Now once he does do that, he is going to cause carnage, absolutely obliterating any of the dirt that he's rolling through. So this is good as it will open up more areas for you to dodge and move around. And effectively you just want to stay in the middle of him. Pummel him as much as possible with your range weapons is probably the best way. Again though, you could probably chase him with a melee weapon if you really want, and just avoid especially him charging at you. Absolutely, the new mage and warlock classes come in handy here, as obviously your minions and summons do a great job of pretty much doing damage while you're dodging or moving around. And again, using the slime gear will help here too if you want, but maybe not as necessary as when you took on Glurch. Keep dodging, keep hitting, and eventually he will pretty much die. If you're trying to lead him to just get loads of resources by demolishing tons of walls, be careful. After a while he will get less interested, and when he does so he regenerates health. And to fight him again, you don't actually return to the same spot that you killed him. Instead there will be a special rune spot close to the circle. That's why it's a good idea to run and explore all the way round, around 250 blocks from core. And you should come across that path to it if you have done a big massive going around the whole circle. Obviously grab the loot, especially the actual core idol here and Ghorm's horn. Farming Ghorm will give you more chance of getting the full chieftain armor set, but you can get it from other drops too. Obviously place his horn inside the actual core and it unlocks some new weapons, as well as the ability to craft the core recalls, which allow you to teleport home, and this is definitely something I would recommend getting as soon as you can. That core statue, that's what's needed to summon the next trader. This is how you can go ahead and replay both of the boss fights you've encountered so far, including obviously Ghorm and Glurch. You need to buy these summoning idols, go ahead and put them down on their runestones, and you can fight them again. So after them 2 bosses, it's probably time for you to just chill a little bit, make plenty of food, decorate your base a little bit more, make sure you've got plenty of farms running, take advantage of any new unlocks that you've crafted, or maybe reinforce a lot of the weapons and armor that you might have found that you're finding useful. As the next 2 bosses are a bit of a jump up in difficulty. So using the location stone, I've found Malugaz, and we're going to pretty much directly dig a straight line all the way to him, or close enough. A big change is that normally he's in a tiny little arena on his own, but this time they've put him inside a giant maze, and this maze is going to be filled with much tougher cavelins. Absolutely put beds down whenever you get to this point, just so that you're not really forced to come back, or like I said, make sure you go ahead and start thinking about putting a railway track this way. The maze can be pretty tough, especially if you're using a warlock class or magic class. I think sometimes it might be easier with a melee or range build, as the corridors are so tight and a lot of the warlocks can really do a number on you with their magic fireballs. So hopefully you've got lots of foods. I would definitely rely on movement speed here, and again utilising anything like the swift feather, that's going to give you a speed boost. To summon Ghorm, this is what you have to do. You should have hopefully come across plenty of crystal skull shards. If you actually have them in your hotbar, you can then go ahead and hold the use button and craft a bunch of the actual summoning idols you need. It's 3 crystal shards, I do believe, to summon them. You'll find plenty of these in any of the ancient pots and storage chests that you come across, as well as drops from the cavelins. This guy you really don't want to mess with if you're a melee build. Either switch to something a bit more ranged, or just accept the fact you're going to be burning a lot and you'll need to heal constantly. Now the first phase isn't that bad and you kind of think you've won, but oh no, he's about to go even tougher and setting off fires all around, and then goes into melee mode where he charges at you. This is where you really need something speedy. If you're playing with friends, one of you can maybe put out some of the fires with a watering can, and you won't be able to make the arena bigger because it needs like a stupid amount of mining damage. I don't think you can even mine through it once you get the appropriate tools later. If you die at this point, he will revert back to his first phase, so yeah, you don't want to have to do this again. Even if you have got a bed nearby, I'm pretty sure still he will revert. So best you can, try and avoid the flames, blitzing through them using the either swift actual ring or the feather. And again, it feels like the Warlock class is pretty much the go-to actual class here, as your summons can be doing a lot of damage, otherwise obviously range is going to be best. You've got more chance of dropping a lot of the second set of mage gear from him, the soaring set. If you've got the potions and the crystal shards, it's well worth trying to farm him until you pretty much will die, because obviously you want to get as much loot as possible. Be warned, he can come out of his maze if you do try escaping, but he won't follow you necessarily that far. So if you really are taking a pounding, you don't want to die for whatever reason, then you can just leave and go your way through the maze, and he should give up eventually. I got a really good item this time, which was the basically magic lens, which allows me to teleport short distances, and that works even better than the actual feather you can get. So deep in the clay biomes, you will eventually find Hive Mother. Now this can be a tough one, as I found a lot of the grubs are actually tougher creatures to fight, and they tend to home in on you, especially the explosive ones, more so than fighting cavelins. And this is definitely one that you want to prepare a little bit and make an arena. So the thing is, don't accidentally fire off an arrow shot or magic charge and accidentally hit the Hive Mother. Instead, go to work clearing out any spaces around and don't get too close. There more than likely will be a ton of grubs you'll have to defeat, but it's definitely worth taking a bit more stealthy approach. Now the actual grub walls themselves, the living flesh, they are a bit tougher to mine, so you might have to get your mining skill up or make sure you've got a good amount of mining gear. Obviously the mining rock ring and the mining rock necklace will increase your mining score. And remember when I said you sometimes get a few creatures come and hunt you? Well, this is what happened here with just these 3 slimes deciding to go and raid me. That's the extent of the raids, hence why you don't need too many base defences in the early days. Anywho, you want to dig a little trench. I would say get as close to actually having the Hive Mother on the edge of your screen. In fact, I would try and give myself even more space by digging at least 2 or 3, so it's 3 stone blocks wide. And then this is another one where you want range. Then start firing him with all your minions summoned if you are going for the Warlock class. And then you've just got to basically avoid the acid that it shoots. Now you can do this with the actual teleportal one or the actual fast travel feather, and it will help out a lot. Otherwise, make sure you've got your hoe active right next to your main ranged weapon, and you can utilise that too. You always get a big notice of when it's actually going to drop, although it does get a bit harder. In the second phase they will start shooting more and you'll have more grubs blocking your way. This is again why I think the Warlock class is so good, at least for boss fights at the moment. But if I dug just a little bit further in, I would have been able to avoid more of these slimes. Now obviously the slime does do damage against you, but as long as you blocked off your little perch here, none of the other grubs can actually get you. If you're dead set against being a Warlock, then obviously range is going to be something else. And it will be a bit tougher, but it's certainly doable. So plenty of healing foods are needed here using your heartberries. What you're really hoping to farm here is the Hive Bone armor. You can get other grub armor sets that make you pretty much one of them, and they'll leave you alone as you're exploring the caves. The Hive Bone makes you immune against acid damage. Now technically the Hive Mother has now been relegated to a side boss, so it's swapped positions with Malugaz, as Malugaz used to be kind of the side boss. I am going to have more dedicated special videos taking on these bosses, but there is a particular fish you might want to look out also for taking this guy on. The green blister head. This reduces, again, makes you immune to acid for a number of minutes. Other ways that you could try, you could place a bunch of spike traps all around, but the acid will still land on them, meaning they'll do damage to you when you walk over them. Spike traps won't obviously kill the hive, but they will kill any of the grubs around. So it could be a good idea to also put a line of them just on the perch where they're going to be trying to get to you. It took a while versus summoning all my minions, but I did do the job. But it is an optional boss. There is no drop from it that you really need to progress at the moment. And the last thing I guess I wish I knew was, if you want to progress further, you do need to go and touch that outer barrier wall, and it will pretty much disappear if you defeated all the bosses. Because everything was locked off via this little window of 1.0, it didn't happen for me here, but that's what's meant to happen once you've defeated Malugaz as well as Glurch and Ghorm. So hopefully this has given you a heads up of what to expect and top tips on defeating the bosses. But like I said, there will be more individual videos looking at all the drops that you can get from them and more. So make sure you subscribe for future Core Keeper content. Go and check out a lot of my guides, which are still pretty valid right now. And as always, I'll see you ratbags with more soon.